So the last thing I'll talk about with you today is the autonomic nervous system, and that regulates any body activity that is not under voluntary control. A lot of systems are governed by autonomic nervous system cycles, and they're sort of occurring on a regular basis, right? They're cycles, they repeat. But different systems are not always coordinated in newborn babies. Okay, in infants, the cycles are important, right? They help promote rest from activity. And of course, then they help promote complementary stimulation that activity provides and then the rest that follows. But, there are different types of cycles. Some cycles repeat regularly and very often, like let's say, once every second or every few seconds. So the heart beating or the lung expanding and contracting as infants breathe, right? These are examples of involuntary bodily activities. Even when the infant is allowed to suck if they're eating, right? They are sucking in a pretty, rapid, fast, rhythmic motion. Then there are going to be other involuntary activities like just general body movements that cycle every minute or two, right? If you watch, let's say, a 6-month-old infant, right, they will occasionally, kick an arm, kick a leg. It's all involuntary movement, but it is happening every minute or two, not every second and not every hour. And then there are those cycles like sleep and wake states, right, that occur every few hours. So there's the wake state, the quiet sleep state where there's no rapid eye movement. There's the active sleep state, which is when you do have rapid eye movements and dreaming, and that's happening every few hours. So the thing to keep in mind with infants is that at any one time, you have this simultaneous and independent cycling of several overlapping rhythms. And arousal states are not going to be as regular as other types of autonomic nervous system activities like breathing, right? Arousal states are pretty variable, actually. Infants shift really frequently between states of sleep and drowsiness and alertness and activity. And sometimes it takes them several months to establish a sort of predictable schedule of wake and sleep states. So it's normal for there to be a lot of variability in terms of when infants finally gain the ability to regulate those sleep and wake states. That being said, the age at which an infant does eventually control or regulate that state, or the switching between states, has some really important implications for infant development and for infant care and their caregivers, certainly for parents, right? Think about an infant who is very late in their ability to regulate their sleep-wake cycles. That infant is probably not sleeping through the night and hasn't been for more time than usual, right? And so that may create, lack of sleep in the caregivers or parents, may lead to depression or anxiety or irritability or other problems that then, of course, impact the infant's development. And so you can see how it's a very bidirectional process. The extent to which an infant can actually eventually regulate those sleep-wake states indicates that their nervous system is in fact maturing. And we know that infants who receive more sensitive caregiving do tend to spend more time in quiet sleep compared with infants who are in less stable environments. Of course, other experiences like co-sleeping can also influence the timing of state regulation. So co-sleeping is a really controversial one, actually. It's when you obviously have an infant or a young child, right, share a bed with their parent or both parents at night. And it was pretty common in the United States until the beginning of the 20th century, and then it was really actively discouraged. And there's a lot of mixed research out there about this. The thinking is that kids need to become independent, they need to develop their own sense of autonomy, and some psychologists felt that co-sleeping impedes that to an extent, right? Pediatricians and the American Academy of Pediatrics had advised parents for a long time to have children sleep in their own areas away from parents. And there is a lot of research to support this. There's research that shows that co-sleeping leads to more nighttime crying. That was a study in Japan. There have been studies that have found that it's associated with various sleep problems in white children and Hispanic children, but not as much in African American children. Issues with perhaps another study found issues with abuse, psychological damage. So, there definitely is, and there's of course the biggest reason of all, which is that there's a risk of adults rolling over in their sleep, right, and unknowingly suffocating or killing their infant if they're sleeping in the bed with them. Now, there are those cultures that find that co-sleeping is very normal, even beneficial. It kind of promotes the bonding between parent and child and allows mom to nurse her child easily throughout the night. And this is more common in less Western cultures and certain Asian cultures, in some of the Pacific Islands, in parts of North Africa. You see a lot of co-sleeping, and people say it leads to fewer awakenings at night. Some studies say it leads to shorter periods of sleep, but knowing all of this, I want you to think about this issue and talk a little bit about this in the discussions. You don't all have to do that, but I'd like to see at least one question engaging in this discussion about co-sleeping and whether you think this arrangement should be supported or not. So at this point, we're at the end of the first video lecture. Please make sure that you know the 3 principles of physical growth. You know the difference between norms and individual differences, that you can tell me how the central nervous system develops and what the basic general anatomy of the brain is. Don't worry too much about memorizing specific, association areas of the cortex, but just basic general anatomy. The 4 key processes of brain development are very important to understand, right? That was synaptogenesis, synaptic pruning, brain plasticity, and myelination. And then finally, what the autonomic nervous system is and what it does.